As promised, Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index for 2018 is being released today. In fact, I think it has already been released. David's here in studio to talk to me about it. Basically, the index reflects the rate of corruption in 180 countries globally. And according to the index, attempts to combat corruption in most countries are moving at a snail's pace. So David Lewis, the Executive Director of Corruption Watch, is here. He's in studio with me. Good to see you, Dave. Thanks so much for coming in.
Pleasure. Thanks.
So, I just glimpsed it somewhere saying that South Africa ranks 73rd out of 180 countries on the Global Corruption Index. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, we've dropped 2 places since last year. I mean, I think the pertinent issue, though, is that we score 43 out of 100, which places us in that quite large category of countries that are below the 50 mark, which are deemed to be countries who face serious corruption problem. So that's where we are.
So last year you say we were 70.
I think last year we were 71, this year we're 73. The score, 43, has remained the same.
Okay.
You know, one of the difficulties with this index is that because of the scale of the surveys that are done across the world, they tend to be sort of about 6 months out of date. In other words, these are based on surveys taken about 6 months ago.
Okay.
And a lot has happened in South Africa then, some of which might have pushed us further down the index, like the Bosasa stuff.
I mean,
others of which might have improved us, like the fact that government has demonstrated a much greater determination to deal with corruption.
What have they done? I mean, let's talk about that.
No, it should not be overstated, but, you know, the removal of Moyeni, the removal of the National Director of Public Prosecutions, the removal of some of the boards of the parastatals, some particularly venal cabinet ministers have been gotten rid of, though there are a couple who remain. So I think that it is different, certainly, from the Zuma administration, and I think it's a significant improvement.
Yeah.
But like I say, you know, one of the things that's happening now, partly as a result of the Zondo Commission, is that we're discovering precisely how bad things were. And that may have, as I say, if the survey was taken today, amongst people listening to what's going on in the Zondo Commission, they might have concluded we had a worse corruption problem than we had last year.
Yeah.
People who were asked at the time that the ESCOM board was being fired and Moyane was being fired might have thought that we had less of a corruption problem.
I want to ask you, just in terms of people actually being held accountable, is removal good enough? Because that's I think a major concern of most South Africans. When we look at the corruption levels, just because you're removed out of a position, does that mean that, you know what, justice has been served, you no longer have that position? Absolutely
not. And that's the critical thing. I mean, you know, the institutions that were first captured in the state capture project were the criminal justice institutions, the NPA and the Hawks, or as they were previously, the Scorpions. And so it's not surprising that they're the most difficult institutions to turn around. But I absolutely agree with you that if we don't start to see prosecutions pretty soon, and there is ample evidence to go on. I mean, the Bosasa stuff, a lot of the Bosasa stuff that we're hearing about has been known for a really long time.
Yeah.
And there's no call to wait for the Zondo Commission to finish doing its work before the prosecutorial agencies act. And I think that next year's Corruption Perceptions Index is going to be determined by whether there are prosecutions of leading figures in the whole corruption saga.
How seriously is this index taken? I mean, does this determine investment into the country?
Look, by no means the only thing that determines it, but I have no doubt that it's taken note of, as are, you know, other big surveys of competitiveness or the ease of doing business. This is one of those that will be considered, undoubtedly.
My big concern is when you look at the index and the results once again showing that the sub-Saharan Africa region is still the worst region. And why? What is primarily wrong that we always coming out as the worst performing region?
Weak institutions, weak governance. You know, one of the things that, one of the themes or the overriding theme of this particular survey has been the relationship between democracy and corruption. And we can see in societies that are poorly governed, where democratic governance is very weak, corruption is bad. Yeah. You know, we can see in South Africa that in order to promote the state capture project, institutions like Parliament and the criminal justice authorities, institutions of the democracy, had to be compromised. We saw, on the other hand, how other institutions of democracy, the media, civil society organizations, were very instrumental in constraining corruption. So the relationship between democracy and corruption is very strong, and one of the problems with the sub-Saharan African region is that democratic institutions tend to be weak.
Yeah, I love how you quote saying, even though African leaders declared 2018 as the African Year of Anti-Corruption, the commitment didn't actually
it didn't amount to
translate
much.
into anything.
And I mean, I doubt that you've ever heard that 2018 was
No,
the
it's the first time I ever heard that.
Well,
I'm reading it now for the first time.
That's the problem.
Was that the slogan for last year?
For last year, yeah.
Tell me, which are the countries that come out shining? That say there is no corruption, they're number one. Would you happen to know that?
I think that if I recall correctly, Denmark and New Zealand come at the top of it. But you know, look at that sub-Saharan African index, and we're 9th on that index. So, you know, when people say, you know, South Africa will soon be going the way of the rest of Africa, well, I look at it and I think there are at least 8 countries, as far as corruption is concerned, whose lead we may well do well to follow. You know, countries like Senegal, Botswana, Mauritius, the Seychelles, all Namibia, all outperform us by quite a considerable margin.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list in front of us. So it's the Seychelles, Botswana, Cabo Verde, Rwanda, Namibia, Mauritius, Sao Tome, Senegal, and then South Africa.
Yeah.
And we're followed by Burkina Faso.
Yeah.
I mean, that's... And you know, we always are explained as this shining light on the continent, and yet when these indexes come out, these surveys come out, and all of this talk of corruption and manipulation of the system, our reputation it's not doing us any good.
Absolutely. You know, and I think, you know, when I heard some of the things that the President and the Finance Minister were saying at the Davos shindig this last while, at least they seem to recognize that our reputation hinges on our perceived will and ability to tackle corruption. And I really hope that, you know, this year is going to be the year of fighting corruption in South Africa, certainly.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that is the case. But just not such good news coming out of this index that was released today. You can go online. I searched it. I found it there. It's called Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, and out of 180 countries, South Africa coming in at 73.
Yeah, that's right.
73. And we kind of the same as we were last year, but dropping a few places, which is not good. That is not even taken into account what we're hearing coming out of the State Capture Commission. All right, David Lewis, Executive Director of Corruption Watch, again, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us here on Morning Live. We take